All right, guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to talk about this, a Spikes Tactical on or with a CBC upper chambered in 5.56. Now, longtime viewers of the channel will note that I've already reviewed this rifle. This is actually one of the earlier AR-15s that I did here on the channel. This is not an in-depth nitty-gritty review on all the pieces, parts, features, and stuff like that of this rifle and why it is that I picked it. If you're looking for that, go ahead and check out the link in the description to the original video. This is a revisit video, so we're going to talk about some things out of the original video's comment section. We're going to go over how my thoughts or opinions might have changed about different aspects of this rifle's accessories, features, setup, all that kind of stuff over the years. We're going to bring this into line with my current review methodology, going through any updates that I have on recommendations as well as competitive offerings out on the market, and then discuss the goals or the long-term fate of this rifle before everything's said and done. All right, so with that, why don't we go ahead and get into some stuff out of the comments section. One of the hottest things out of the comments section was a discussion on this lower. This is the Spikes Tactical Crusader lower, and as such, it has the Crusader shield and cross, and the markings are also in both Latin and English. For the markings for the selector, mind you, are in both Latin and English for peace, war, and God wills it. And I think that is all of the Crusader themed things on this particular lower. And a lot of people took issue that I took issue with the aesthetics of this rifle, wanting to know why it is that I bothered buying it and all those types of things. And if I didn't like what it is that it said on the rifle, why do I have it, and why is that even an issue to me to begin with? Now, I did address that in the original video where I decided that the feature set of this rifle outweighed my opinions on the aesthetic of the lower. But there's a couple things that I want you guys to keep in mind whenever it is that I talk about this type of stuff. Having this type of stuff on my lower or any firearm, anywhere on a firearm, is really not my vibe. That is not my aesthetic. I prefer that my rifles have a very professional and serious appearance to them and all that kind of stuff. So you're not going to find me with Glocks that have Punisher skull back plates. You're not going to find me with 1911 grips that say Molon Labe. And there's also that case a couple years ago where that police officer had an AR-15 where when his dust cover was open, right across the open portion of the dust cover, it stated, "You're effed." That's not my thing. That is not how I prefer to accessorize or display serious use weapons, for the most part. This rifle being an obvious exception based off of the feature set that we talked about previously. It was this or it was Vikings, and I'm not really into Vikings either, so I decided that this was the lesser of the two. If they had had a plain lower, I would have bought that. And when you consider that this was on the rack, a little bit more expensive but better featured than at the time Smith & Wesson M&P15 2s, the Sport 2s, Ruger AR-556s, Bushmaster QRCs, this rifle really stood out. So I was willing to overlook those parts and of the lower that I didn't necessarily like. Now, this attitude of mine towards this type of stuff also extends towards the colors of firearms. I don't really care for pink grips on revolvers or Tiffany blue Kimbers and stuff like that. That's not my thing. That's not a serious firearm at that point. That is a accessory statement or something along those lines. It is more jewelry than it is an actual serious weapon at that point, in my own opinion, because I've never seen a serious person run a Tiffany blue anything. It's the same kind of thing where I don't necessarily wear brand stuff, as far as I'm not going to be somebody's billboard. So you're not going to find me with an HK hat or a Ruger t-shirt or something along those lines. The closest I get to that is that I have some clothing that has been given to me by the organization that I work for that has emblems and mottos and all that kind of stuff on it. That stuff is stuff that I got for free. I did not pay my money for it. And I'm kind of a cheapskate when it comes to an awful lot of things, since I have to be able to save money in order to be able to buy bullets. You guys looked at the price of 6.5 Carcano lately, let alone availability of it. Ammo's expensive, guns are expensive, accessories are expensive, so I cut corners where I can. So sure, if somebody gave me a Ruger t-shirt, would I wear it? Yes. It would be a gym shirt or a range shirt. It wouldn't be something that I wear around all the time. Same kind of thing with morale patches. Never been a big fan of morale pouches. I've known some people who had them. They never struck me as very serious. The people that wore them were not people that I considered to be the peak of capability and all that kind of stuff. So not really ever been my thing. I do wear patches, but they're patches that have either been provided to me by work or provided to me by people that I've worked with. Different like organizations and stuff like that I've worked with in the past. And I do enjoy doing patch exchanges, and I do like displaying those because, well, it's interesting. That's a tapestry at that point of experience, not necessarily, Major League Infidel type stuff. Like that's just, to me, that's kind of pointless. Not really my thing, not my vibe. All right, so now the question that we're going to answer before everything's said and done here is, does this lower bug me enough to do something about it? All right, so with that, why don't we go ahead and get into the accessories discussion, starting off with this light. This is the Enforce WMLX, 600 lumens, and also has an IR setting. This is set up on a constant on, so anytime that I'm using it and I just want to temporarily expose the light, I need to make sure that I turn it back off whenever it is that I'm done. Longtime viewers of the channel know that I am not a big fan of Enforce lights. There was a short period of time where I bought a bunch of them because I needed to accessorize a bunch of rifles in a short period of time, and these were relatively inexpensive. However, I had a bad experience with their customer service, and I stopped buying their products after that. That customer service interaction was not so bad that I went ahead and got rid of the lights, though. So these lights are still, lights like this and others are still riding on several of my rifles right now with no intentions of changing them out because, well, I haven't broken them. I haven't managed to damage them enough to where they don't work. The batteries have been lasting. A lot of the complaints about Enforce I have not seen. So I've been keeping these lights in service up until such time that I either need to get rid of them, because like, I don't know, maybe I need to generate some money, or if I do manage to break them, in which case we'll come back and talk about it here on the channel. Now, one oversight that I just realized in the process of getting ready for this video is that though I don't own my own NVGs, I do use NVGs for work from time to time. And I have never put this light on my duty rifle in order to explore whether or not it's worth anything as an IR light. So maybe that's something that has to be done in the future if anyone has an interest in that. All right, does this light and its mounting position still represent my opinions when it comes to mounting lights? Stuff that we talked about quite extensively in my fighting rifle setup video, which if you're interested in that, go ahead and check out the link in the description. Well, my goal is still, with my fighting rifles and lights and all that kind of stuff, is for them to be as ambidextrous as possible. I prefer to run tail caps whenever it is that I can. And you see that on the Streamlights and the Surefires that I run today. I still use some pressure pads on some of my rifles just because I haven't updated those setups and really don't have any drive to do so. It's nice to have some stuff that's set up with a pressure pad in order to keep testing my own previously held opinions and thoughts and all that kind of stuff. However, the position of this light, while ambidextrous, which is my pursuit whenever it is that I have lights set up, is not necessarily the best. I can see it in my optic. It doesn't necessarily obscure anything. I don't lose sight of what's going on, especially if I keep like my other eye open. And I can't see it when I increase the magnification. However, I would like it in a position that isn't as obstructive to the optic. Now, something that I've switched to on my more current fighting rifles are represented here in this Daniel Defense DD M4A1 RIS3, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. So we can see here, I have a Streamlight ProTac rail mount on an offset M-lock setup. I prefer that my lights now sit in this kind of like 11 or 1 o'clock position here on the rail. They're still ambidextrous. I can still, if need be, I do have to roll my hand up on there, but that's not a bad thing if I'm, doing some short-term ambidextrous type stuff. That's where I prefer them at. However, this rifle, or this light, I should say, is not that readily adaptable to that same type of setup. Because what I have to do, since this has a built-in Picatinny rail attachment method, I would have to get some sort of offset Picatinny rail mount to attach to either the Picatinny on top of this rail or the key mod slots. And that's not my preference because I'm stacking tolerances at that point. So what I did with this Streamlight was I took off the original Picatinny rail mount and I used instead the provided M-lock rail mount setup to get it set up where I wanted on the rifle. That's my preference now for how it is that I do business. This light does not readily make itself available for that. So if I wanted to update the light setup on here to be in line with my current setup, I'd have to completely replace this light at this point, especially because even with an offset rail, this light has kind of a large footprint that wouldn't really be all that well captured on a short Picatinny section. It'd look weird. It's another aesthetic thing, but like aesthetics matter. So, all right, so that's the light. Let's go ahead and talk about these flip-up iron sights. Now, in the original video, someone pointed out in the comments section that I referred to these as Ruger M-Bus sights, and they are correct. That's technically not possible. They appear like Magpul's M-Bus. However, these are branded by Ruger. They have the Ruger Phoenix right there. These are Ruger branded flip-up iron sights. And though they have an appearance like that of the Magpul M-Bus, they actually have a different mounting system that is different enough for you to be able to say that they're not a direct copy of Magpul's sights. However, they are spring-loaded, they are not locking, and they are made of plastic. So if you look at these things from across the room, they look just like M-Bus. So you can understand how somebody could mistake them for that. And in all honesty, guys, I'm a big guy for making sure that you're saying things accurately. You know, words have meaning, but also don't have meaning. And the terms that you use are an important part of communication, all those types of things. So yes, I was wrong. These are Ruger sights that strongly resemble Magpul's. Now, these sights are also no longer in line with my methodology on setting up fighting rifles. Why is that? Well, something that I stated in the video, and I do have represented on all of my fighting rifles, is that I have to have backup iron sights. However, we will note that the mount for this LPVO is not quick detach. So if something were to happen in field to this optic, I need a tool in order to be able to get onto these iron sights. That's really not that helpful. So in my current methodology, if I were to bring this rifle in line with what it is that I'm doing now, I would need to do one of two things. I would either need to swap out this mount for some sort of QD mount, or I would need to remove these sights and go to an offset red dot like I have on the Daniel Defense. So I have my 1-6 as my primary optic, and then I roll over to this Vortex Strikefire 2 red dot. Again, previously viewed on the channel, link in the description. All right, so that is something that if I were to continue on with this rifle, I'm going to go ahead and need to update one way or the other. All right, let's talk about this rail. This is a 15-inch key mod rail. It's lightweight, it's slim. I have no real complaints about this rail. There is one issue though. Key mod has definitely lost in the market to M-Lock. At one point, there was a huge discussion about which was better, and there were trials done about it and all that kind of stuff. And though the key mod rail wasn't really that measurably worse than M-Lock, if at all, M-Lock has more or less become the industry standard. There are tons of new rifles coming out with M-Lock. I cannot think of any new rifles coming out right now that have key mod rails on them. However, key mod rails are still built. So if you like key mods, you can still get it. The question is, for how much longer? I have a feeling that M-Lock is going to continue to rise in the market. Picatinny's never really going to go away because of military adoption. And the key mod rail is going to wind up phasing out. Currently, though, you can still find parts and accessories. So if I did want to get a Streamlight ProTac and throw it on this particular rifle, I would be able to get a adapter from Arasaka in order to be able to do that, as well as like if I wanted to put a stubby vertical grip on this in order to help me kind of like drive the rifle and all those types of things, which I would kind of like to do, I can go to manufacturers like BCM or YHM and get stubby grips for this that will interface directly with my key mod rail. So currently, I would not necessarily say, you know, throw away all of your key mod rails, they're junk, but I am going to tell you that like the next 10 years, you might have a lot of trouble finding key mod accessories. All right, let's go ahead and talk about this optic. This is the TrueGlow Omnia 6 1:6 LPVO with an illuminated reticle. Now, as is typical of all LPVOs with illuminated reticles, it's not that great of an illuminated reticle. It's pretty easy to wash out in sunlight, not even like that much sunlight. How has this optic been working out for me? This optic is indicative of issues I've had with other budget scopes. These turrets are locking. However, here recently, I have been updating all of my zeros to 50-yard zeros because I have a 200-yard range, and it occurred to me one day that I could be truing my 50-yard zero if I just did a 50-200 zero. So I have a better distance zero than what I currently have just working at 50 yards. So now I've been switching all my rifles over to 50-yard zeros instead of having the kind of like collection of zeros that I've had over the years. And as I was making adjustments, I found that my windage turret was having trouble locking after I made like the final adjustments that I needed in order to be able to zero the rifle. So I kept trying to play with it, figuring out like where it is I had to turn that turret to in order to be able to allow it to lock. And it was something that really surprised me. It is not that unusual to have that type of issue in your more budget optics. Now there's ways around it. You have to kind of like go past it and then come back to it. And if you forget your clicks, then, you know, that's going to be irritating. You're going to have to fire a couple more rounds in order to be able to figure out whether or not it is you did what you needed to do. But that's just something to keep in mind whenever it is that you're talking about these types of inexpensive setups. Now, is that a problem then, Murph? Do you not recommend this optic? And what I would say is it's not that I don't recommend it. It's that I now want you to clarify what your purpose is for the optic. So if your plan is to put this optic on like some sort of precision setup, be it a DMR or an SPR or, you know, a recce rifle or something along those lines, where your goal is to dial the turrets to your target, then I do not recommend this optic. If your goal is instead to just use this as a combat style optic where you're going to make your adjustments based off of splash and what you can see in the reticle, then yes, I would recommend this optic at that point. I would still recommend this optic at that point. This does have a kind of ACSS style reticle, not a one-for-one. It's just kind of like the same overall vibe. There's a, you know, horseshoe and then a crosshair in the center, a little different than the ACSS, but a similar overall concept. So you could use this to be able to generate some data, to be able to make some effective hits at distance. Maybe not necessarily like first round through the eye hole precision type hits, but combat effective hits nonetheless. All right, guys, that's the optic. Another update that I've made. So I have an Odinworks extended charging handle on this particular rifle. Now, let me go ahead and lock this back so you guys get a better look at it. See that oversized latch right there? All right. Now, some people about charging handles. I generally do not. For me, a GI style charging handle has never really been a problem because I really don't actuate the charging handle all that much on an AR-15. The only time it really comes up is if for whatever reason I was walking around in an amber status, or which would be magazine inserted, no round in the chamber, or if I'm clearing a malfunction or something along those lines. I've not really had a malfunction. I've had a variety of AR-15 malfunctions over the years, both purposeful, manufactured for the purpose of training, as well as accidental. I've never had an issue being able to grip the standard AR-15 charging handle in order to be able to clear those malfunctions. However, when we go to some type of magnified optic, I do like having the extended charging handle just because it gives me more space to be able to grip around the objective housing, to be able to get on that charging handle should I need to do so. So now all of my optic or my magnified optics equipped AR-15s have extended charging handles on them. All right, let's talk about this sling. This is a single point sling, which has been on this rifle the entire time that I've had it. There are circumstances where I like the single point sling, and that's primarily if I'm just standing out on the range, on a flat range, not necessarily doing a whole lot of like dynamic movement and all that kind of stuff. So we're talking about like a level 1 or level 2 course or something along those lines, where you're pretty stationary, you're just kind of hanging out at the range, you're not doing a whole bunch of movement. I did take this rifle to a 2-gun Renegade match a couple years ago, and the first stage you were shooting off of VTAC barriers and running with ammo cans in both hands. And this really started to display the, you know, often talked about but rarely demonstrated issues with a single point sling. So the first time I took off with it, I had the rifle slung to the front, and of course it's sitting here bouncing against my crotch. Not a terribly comfortable thing to have happen. The next time I moved the sling back behind me, and ran that way, which made it so that it wasn't bouncing into my crotch the entire time. However, it was bouncing against my leg, which was equally annoying. One of the great things about a 2-point adjustable sling is that you can go ahead and cinch this bad boy up against your chest so that there's less movement as you're doing whatever it is that you need to do, and then you can uncinch it and get the rifle back into action. That is definitely the thing that pretty much ends the argument as to whether or not a single point sling is still effective. If you're just doing very simple flat range type things, sure, single point sling. If you're doing a lot of dynamic movement and you don't have a way to secure the rifle to you, I've known guys that used either a hook type setup or have also used like rare earth magnets to help keep a gun attached to them. That's something that you could explore with this, but something to keep in mind is that an AR-15 does not have a lot of steel on it. It has a lot of aluminum. So there's only a couple of areas that you're going to get a rare earth magnet to work off of. So that's a very niche thing. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's just not the most accessible either. I would say avoid single point slings. All right, what about this buttstock? This is the Trinity Arms buttstock. I forget the actual designation. I'll list it down below if I remember to get a hold of that. How has my opinion changed about this buttstock over time? So originally, I was a big fan of this buttstock, and honestly, that really hasn't changed. It has a very slim profile, and that's something that I really appreciate about buttstocks. That's why I'm not broken up about like the original AR-15 stock, and my preferred stock is the Magpul CTR. This stock runs very narrow. It makes it very easy for me to get it lined up in the pocket just right, as well as it works around body armor really well. Trinity Force as a company, I don't really care for because I bought some of their other accessories and they really did not work out that well for me. Like I managed to break one in a rifle case and another one's kind of just hanging on. Like at some point I'll probably swap it out and just throw it away because they're not terribly expensive to begin with, and it shows. This stock, on the other hand, is like the only redeeming feature for Trinity Force right now. So you're welcome, Trinity Force. All right, guys. That's accessories. How has it been shooting? All right, so of course I've taken this to quite a few range days. I took it to that one competition. I can say that with this sling setup and all that kind of stuff, when I was doing like barrier work, working around like stacked barrels and stuff like that, this was very easy to transition from shoulder to shoulder and all those types of things. I had no real issue with that. How's accuracy going? All right, guys, so I shot a couple of groups with this rifle here recently, all of them with fairly inexpensive ammunition. So 55 grain FMJ 223 chambering from Scorpio and Patriot 2A. Just the cheapest stuff that I could find, because on this channel, we do accuracy testing with the ammunition that you're actually going to be able to get your hands on, the stuff that you're going to be regularly shooting at the range, as well as rifles set up in the manner that they're going to be used in real life. So I don't have an optic that I rotate through all my rifles that's like super high magnification so that I can get these super tight groups and all that kind of stuff. That's uninteresting to me. That's not the goal or purpose of this channel. Nor do I use like special match ammunition so that we could really sit here and, you know, talk about how tight the groups are. So with more field type ammunition, how's it been shooting, Murph? Well, here is some Scorpio FMJ ammunition at 100 yards coming in at 2 3/8 inch. That's not bad. It's just not great either. It's better than Minute and a Man, which when you consider that this is a fighting rifle for me, that's all I really want out of it to begin with. Then also from that same batch of Scorpio, we have a 3 5/8 inch group, which is definitely less impressive, but it's still underneath 4 inches, which is a good start. And then with that Patriot 2A 55 grain FMJ, a just under 4 inch group. So the rifle is definitely printing sub-minute of man, which for a fighting type rifle like this is, I don't consider that to be a bad thing. I consider that to pretty much be the expectation. A lot of people don't necessarily agree with me on that, but that's okay. They can do whatever it is they want to do with their rifles. I have noticed that recoil on this rifle is a little more punchy than some of the other rifles that I have available, which you guys have seen. If you've been with the channel for a little while, you've seen me run a ton of different rifles on the channel. All of them are, well, most of them are mine, and I've definitely started to build more and more of a profile when it comes to shooting the AR-15. And something that I've definitely noticed with carbine length gas systems is they are a little bit more pushy. Now, it's not like they're hurting my shoulder or anything along those lines. They just definitely cause more disturbance to my sights whenever it is that I'm on target, and I have to do a little bit more recoil management in order to be able to drive them through the target. Now, reliability. I have had some interesting reliability occurrences here lately. First off, for whatever reason, this rifle does not like this magazine. This is my Daniel Defense magazine that came with the M4A1 RIS3. And this will lock open on every round with this magazine. So I found that really weird. I then had another issue with one of my GI mags. So I decided I was just going to shoot. I already had the steel targets out that day. I had this rifle with me, had a couple of rounds left over, and decided that I was going to shoot offhand at 50 yards on a 1/3. No, wait, is that the 1/3? Yes, that's my 1/3 man-sized silhouette. And I loaded up the magazine and had a malfunction. So I loaded up the magazine a second time, and I had another malfunction.
Let's try that again. Wow.
And this time, the round was too mangled in order to be able to be used. So I loaded up the single round. It ran just fine. And at that point, I decided that the issue was my old Green Follower GI magazine. Followers give out sometimes, and you know what? You just gotta either throw it away or replace them, which I'll probably replace the springs in that particular magazine because I don't have any money invested in that magazine, and springs are super cheap. So probably something happening here in the future. But those are some interesting occurrences I've had here recently with this rifle. All right, guys, that's shooting. Why don't we go ahead and get into my recommendations when it comes to this particular rifle? Would I recommend this for duty type use? I would recommend it because it has worked so well for me, as long as you're not running Daniel Defense magazines, like Magpuls and stuff like that have worked just fine. However, your organization may not let you do it because this is a cobbled together rifle. And a lot of organizations out there have an issue with home builds, even if it is just pinning an upper and a lower together, which I understand there's a lot of concern that people have cut corners and stuff like that. And I've seen guys cut corners on a lot of things you would think they would not cut corners on for things that they expect to defend themselves with. So if your organization lets you, yes, I would recommend this combination of parts for a duty type rifle. What about a home defense, self-defense gun? Well, this has sat in my ready rack before. This has gone on road trips with me before I had a full roster of ready to go truck guns. This has been a truck gun option for me. It's a little long for that, if I'm being completely honest, but it didn't do bad, mostly because this is such a lightweight and handy rifle to be able to work around as it is. So if I needed to, get a hold of this and shoot through the windshield and have to be broke up kind of high on the rifle like that, it's not necessarily a detriment because it is so light and handy. But home defense, self-defense, Minuteman type rifle, concerned citizen type rifle, absolutely, this would be a fantastic option. All right, well, what about as a competition gun? Well, I did discuss beforehand that I would maybe outfit this to be a competition gun. I was getting into competitions at the time. I was doing a lot of those Renegade 2-gun matches and stuff like that. And I did consider putting in a better trigger, but not necessarily doing a lot of the other things that might be necessary in order to make this a better dedicated competition gun, like perhaps a muzzle brake, dishing the light, and the iron sights, because they're unnecessary in most competitions and all those types of things, and just running an optic, maybe a rollover optic or something along those lines, just to have something set up so that I could have it scaled this set up to maximum magnification, and then if a target comes up close, instead of dialing, I could just, I can just rotate the rifle and be on what it is that I need to be on. I never did any of that because I instead decided that at this point in my life, I would much rather keep rifles set up as fighting rifles and continue to use competitions as my training with defensive or fighting type options for me. So that's why that never came around. If we're talking about it in this current setup, if that's your stated purpose to just train with your equipment, then sure, take this to competitions. It's not going to be a detriment. If you're looking to be competitive in competitions, I think the biggest thing that I would take away from this rifle would be the gas system. And I would encourage you to go with a medium length gas system as opposed to the carbine length. Everything else about this rifle, fantastic. Swap out the trigger and go with the medium length gas system, maybe add a muzzle brake. This thing would be good to go as a competition rifle for dedicated to actually trying to be competitive type shooting. All right, well, what about as a hunting rifle? Well, most places you cannot hunt deer-sized game with 223 5.56. If you are in a place where you can hunt with 223 5.56, I still wouldn't necessarily recommend it. For most places, you can hunt predatory game with a 223 5.56, and this would be just fine for that. This would be a just fine pig rifle. There are lots of people who use AR-15s to hunt pigs, and especially with this IR setup, you kind of at least got some advantage there. So I could see this being used for that type of purpose. A lot of pig hunting happens at night, if you didn't know. Well, pig eradication at that point. That's barely hunting. All right, well, what about as a woods gun? If we're talking about how the rifle's set up with a single point sling, not so much. Now, I wouldn't necessarily carry a rifle on me in a woods type situation. I wouldn't go hiking with this thing by any means. But if you're talking about throwing this across the back of a farm truck or your UTV or whatever, sure, this would be fine. You could handle predators of the 2 or 4-legged variety, as well as, maybe do some plinking throughout the day and all those types of things. Now, if you're in bear country, I would not recommend any intermediate cartridge on bear. You could probably shoot them enough times for it to work, but I would like something much more potent and more to the point than something like this. All right, guys, that's recommendations. What would be competitive offerings out on the market? Now, of course, we're talking about the AR-15 market, and we're now talking about the kind of build market, not necessarily 80% lower build market, but I bought a lower and now I'm just looking for, I bought a lower at a good price and now I'm looking for an upper at a good price. And there's lots of places that you could go. I think one of the biggest things to remember about this rifle is that I paid around $700 for this. So this rifle is in the budget category, but it has a lot of features to it that puts it in a much higher category, which is one of the things that always appealed to me. Now, there are more production offers out there that have a lot of these features, some of them for a little bit less. So keep that in mind as well. But if you're looking to do like the buy and cobble a rifle together type method, then I would say BCM would be a great starting point, be the upper or the lower, as well as Aero Precision. BCM kind of being a little bit on the higher side of the upper and lower, Aero Precision being in the more like moderate pricing. You could also put PSA in this chat because they kind of built their whole business model around being able to sell you a lower at a discounted price and then an upper at a discounted price, but being able to avoid the taxes associated with selling the two together, which you can also get that if that's what you're after, but for this topic right now, that's not really applicable. But I think quality and materials wise, I would put Aero and BCM higher than PSA. I'm not saying PSA is bad. I'm saying that if I'm bracketing this rifle, that's how I'm bracketing this rifle with other manufacturers. All right, guys. That's competitive offerings. Let's answer the burning question here. Do these features and how this rifle has performed, how it handles in the shoulder, how light and easy and pointable and fast it is, does all of that still outweigh the cringe that I get when I look at this lower? And the answer is at this point, no. At some point here in the near future, relatively near future, this rifle will be going bye-bye. The only question is, am I just going to get rid of the lower, or am I going to get rid of the whole kit and caboodle? Because I really don't, the issues that I have with the lower, I don't have with the upper. So I could be convinced to keep this upper and let the lower go. We'll just kind of see how things go. Whenever it is that I finally decide to part with it, which of course, guys, I'm not selling this rifle on YouTube. A lot of you guys have contacted me about like trying to buy guns that I have, and you can't do that. Like I delete those comments almost automatically because that's a problem. You could really get this channel taken down that way. So keep that in mind. So at some point, at the very least, this lower is going away. Possibly the whole thing if myself and whoever it is who's looking to buy it can come to the appropriate accord. All right, guys. I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.
Dame las